This looks like it's maybe the result of someone doing product rule. Like maybe they were trying to find the critical numbers of something, they took a derivative, now they're going to try to find the zeros of it. How I find zeros in math is I factor. So it's important that I know how to factor this. How I factor this is I recognize that there's a common factor of x plus 2 in both. So I'm going to factor an x plus 2 out of this. But the power that I do on the x plus 2 is going to be whatever the lower power is of my options. I have a power of negative 1/3. I have a power of 2/3. I always go with the lower power, the least power. Negative 1/3 is less than 2/3. If I were doing negative 1/3 compared to negative 4/3, negative 4/3 is less than negative 1/3. I always factor the lower one. In this case, I factor out x plus 2 to the negative 1/3 power. Out of this first term, clearly factoring out x plus 2 to the negative 1/3 power will leave a 4x. But out of this other term, the 6 gets left behind, and I'm still going to have some x plus 2. The way I know how much is left is I had 2/3, I took away negative 1/3. 2/3 minus negative 1/3 makes 3/3. I had 2/3, I took away negative 1/3. 2/3 minus negative 1/3 makes 3/3. So in other words, I have here an x plus 2 to the negative 1/3 power, and then I have a 4x plus 6 times x plus 2 to the first power. So that's like 4x plus 6x plus 12. So 10x plus 12. And looking at that, I realized that really from the beginning, I actually had a GCF of 2 that I could have taken out. Doesn't matter, I'll take it out now. I have 2 times x plus 2 to the negative 1/3 power times 5x plus 6. So that's like 2 5x plus 6 over the cube root of x plus 2. Now if I want to know the zeros are negative 6/5, and negative 2 is a critical number because it's the spot where if this is a derivative, the derivative would be undefined at negative 2. In this problem, clearly I have a common factor of 5x minus 1, and the power I'm going to use is going to be the lower power. Between 3/4 and negative 1/4, the lower power is negative 1/4. So from this first term, I'm left with a 2 times 5x minus 1 to the power of, I had 3/4, I take away negative 1/4, 3/4 minus negative 1/4 makes 4/4. From this term, I have a 7x, and the whole 5x minus 1 to the negative 1/4 went away. Negative 1/4 minus negative 1/4 is 0 to the 0th power, it's like times 1. So I have 5x minus to the negative 1/4 times 10x minus plus 7x. Ooh, my pen's getting really laggy, but hey, it's at least. It's never really okay, but it's tolerable. 5x minus 1 to the negative 1/4 power. Oh, it's a shame. I'm back. Excuse that brief technical interruption. 5x minus 1 to the negative 1/4 power, and on the inside, this simplifies to 17x minus 2. So what I have is 17x minus 2 over the 4th root of 5x minus 1. This one's a little bit different. This one's a little bit different because I have a couple common factors, right? I have an x in both of them, and I have a x plus 3 in both of them. So out of the whole thing, I'm going to factor out x to a certain power, and the power I'm going to use on x is the lower power. I have a negative 1/2, I have a 1/2, the lower one is negative 1/2. I'm also going to factor out an x plus 3, and out of my powers, 1/2 and negative 1/2, the lower power here is again negative 1/2. So from this first term, I took out the whole x to the negative 1/2, so that's gone. The x plus 3 to the 1/2, I took away a negative 1/2. 1/2 minus negative 1/2 leaves me with x plus 3 to the 1. And in the next term, I had x to the 1/2, I took away x to the negative 1/2. 1/2 minus negative 1/2 leaves x to the first power. And the x plus 3 to the negative 1/2, I took the whole thing away. So I have an x to the negative 1/2, an x plus 3 to the negative 1/2, and a 2x plus 3. I would advise that you hit pause and make sure that you understood the really colorful line that I wrote here. Make sure you know where I got all of those things. Take as much time as you need. YouTube, there's no timer on YouTube. It's free. Do you know that? It's wonderful. Once you're ready, I have a 2x plus 3 on top, and in my denominator I have a square root of x times a square root of x plus 3, which maybe I'd write together or separate depending on the circumstances, but that's how it would factor. Here I have, well, this one's even simpler. I have x in all three of these, so I'm going to take out x. The power I'm going to use on x is the lowest one, which is -1/2. So x to the 3 halves, 3 halves take away -1/2 makes 4 halves, plus 8, x to the 1/2 take away -1/2 makes 1, plus 15, x to the -1/2 take away x to the -1/2, it's just going to be x to the 0, so it's just plus 15. So that's x to the -1/2 times x squared plus 8x plus 15 factors further, right? Because I know that plus 5 and plus 3 multiply to 15 and add to 8. So this one factors into x plus 5, x plus 3 over square root of x. Again, I have an x in all of these. So I'm going to factor out x to the -1/2 because that's the lowest power I have on x. 3x to the 3 halves minus -1/2 makes 4 halves. Minus 9. Oh, you know what? I did that wrong. I should have also taken out 3. I have a factor of 3 in all of these. So I took away the 3. I'm left with just x to the 3 halves minus -1/2 makes 2. -9, factor out of 3, I'm left with -3. X to the 1/2, factor out x to the -1/2. 1/2 minus -1/2 makes 1. X to the 1. 6, factor out of 3, I have 2. X to the -1/2, I factor out x to the -1/2, so it's just plus 2. Which means x squared minus 3x plus 2, that factors because I can think of numbers that add up to -3 and multiply to positive 2. So this factors to x minus 2, x minus 1 over 3 square root of x. Last one. I have a factor of x squared plus 2 in both of them. So I factor out an x squared plus 2 to the -2/3 versus -8/3. I factor out the lower one, which would be -8/3. If that surprised you, then I don't know, work on your negative numbers. Lower, negative, that's how it works. Lower number looks like a bigger magnitude. From this first piece, I have 2 x squared plus 2 to the, I had -2/3, I took away -8/3. -2/3 minus -8/3 makes -2/3 plus 8/3, which makes 6/3, which is 2. And then I have plus whatever I get from this term, which I took away that whole term, so what am I left with is 1. I have x squared plus 2 times, let's say I expanded this out, because maybe it factors further. I don't think it will, but just in case. X squared plus 2 squared would be x to the 4th, plus 4x squared plus 4. Then I'll have plus 1. X squared, oops, and this was to the -8/3 power. X squared plus 2 to the -8/3 times 2x to the 4 plus 8x squared plus 8 plus 1 makes plus 9. And that does not factor further. If I wanted to try to factor it further, I could think about this as like, well, x squared is kind of like u, so this is like 2u squared plus 8u plus 9. And if I want to factor that, I would do 2 times 9 is 18. Factors of 18. None of the factors of 18 add up to 8, so it's not going to factor. So I have 2x to the 4 plus 8x squared plus 9 over x squared plus 2 to the 8/3 power. I could do the cube root of x squared plus 2 to the 8th power, but that's fine.